host, Mackenzie Wilson. On this episode of the podcast, I'm sitting down with Zadok Leggett, the owner of Chapel Hill Forge, who's a blacksmith, metal fabricator, and custom wood sign carver. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen so that way we can grow our community. And with that, let's get into episode number 17 with Zad. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back to the show. Today I am talking with Zadok Leggett. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So would you like to briefly introduce yourself to our listeners?
So my name is Zadok Leggett. Most people just call me Zad or Z. I am a self-taught, more or less, blacksmith, metal fabricator, hand-carved wooden signs. Kind of just whatever somebody asks me to do, I try to make their dreams come alive.
That sounds really cool. So could you explain a little bit about how you got into your craft?
I was always fascinated in the metalsmith trade. I never really pictured myself here. I was a farrier, which is a guy that puts the shoes on a horse's hoof for a little while, and that kind of got the yearning to do more of it. I guess kind of got the fires going. The reason I got into being a blacksmith and a metal fabricator is a job I was working was being discontinued by the county, and I was going to be out of work. So I needed a way to make a living and provide for my family, and so we got into what we're doing now.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. So you guys do all sorts of like handmade like metal crafts, and then you were mentioning that you do like some sign carving as well. So you guys really have like a cool business going on there.
Yeah, we do the blacksmithing side of things, which are the taking a piece of metal and heating it up and hammering it and making it become a different shape. And then I have the welding side of things where I do a little bit more of the fabricating, making engine stands or who knows whatever a customer comes to me with needs. And then the hand carved signs are, for people's cabins or campers or beach houses or even their houses.
Wow, cool. So you guys have kind of got like a tripart thing going on there. So I think my next question would be like, what is the process like for learning how to do like metalworking?
You can, of course, find YouTube videos all over the place to go off of. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great, but I took a few blacksmith classes in person from some guys who've been doing it for 30 some years and picked up some skills there, and then just kind of were self-taught. So I just kind of messed around with stuff until I figured it out, and did things a lot of times, made a lot of mistakes until I figured out how to do it or how I wanted to manipulate the metal into the shape I wanted it. Read some books, watched some videos, became a member of an association for blacksmiths, and talked to a lot of people who've been doing it for a lot more years than I've been doing it, and picked their brains and got them to kind of give me some insider secrets and trades of how to do the job.
Yeah, cool. So it sounds like you've like kind of pulled your learning from a lot of different places, which is super interesting. So you were mentioning how you became a member of an association for blacksmiths. So could you just elaborate on that a little bit for people who don't know what that is?
Yeah. So the association I'm with is called PABA. It's Pennsylvania Artist Blacksmith Association. And some of the guys are career guys like myself who do it for a living. Some guys are hobbyists. But, of course, with COVID-19, this has kind of made the getting together a lot harder. Usually, it's every other Saturday, or every other month on a Saturday, we would get together and somebody would do a demonstration or have some type of project in mind, and you could bring something that you're working on, and guys would get to vote on it, and there's all kinds of tools that people would be selling, and you get to meet other blacksmiths and talk to them, and it's just kind of a place to come together and all talk about the same thing that we all like to do. With COVID happening, we've only ever got one meeting in this year, and that's it. But a lot of us are still linked up with each other through phone numbers or emails or Facebook or Instagram and stuff like that. So a lot of us still, keep in touch with each other, or if you have a question, you can reach out to one of the guys. And I've had some things where I'm not really sure what the right process is, but I know it can be done, so I've reached out to those guys, and they've been able to help me. So it's been really worth the membership to be part of that association because of what I can get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds just like a nice kind of community overall, just to be a part of and kind of like trade tips and advice, because it seems like it's pretty like you guys kind of like each have your own separate businesses, and it's like a little bit more solitary, but then like it's a nice way to kind of like get together and converse and find other people who are like also blacksmiths.
Yeah, there's definitely no of the competing or, well, I'm doing that, so you can't do that. It's a lot of just being there to help each other out, and see the older guys helping the younger guys is awesome, because that just shows that they want to see this trade continue on for years to come instead of it dying out.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. That's like something that's super important. So the next question I guess that I would have for you is kind of like along those lines. So what is like your favorite part about your job?
I like the jobs where somebody brings me something and says, "Hey, this is something that, like a guy who I know, who's a customer, he's going to be bringing me a weather vane. It goes on top of your house, tells you which direction the wind's blowing." Well, they had their roof redone, and they weren't able to have it put back on top because it would void the warranty. So he's going to be bringing me this weather vane. He wants me to make some metal art out of it that they can stick in the yard and they can still enjoy it. It's just not on the roof. I really enjoy when people bring me something like that and they trust me to just let my creative juices flow, and I can just kind of do whatever, and I'm not really constricted, and make something. And then when they come to pick it up and it's more than what they wanted, and they're just so excited and they love it, and they're just like a kid on Christmas opening up a gift. That's probably my favorite part of the job, just being able to make something out of nothing, or take a bunch of things that weren't intended for that and repurpose them and make them into something cool that people enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. That does sound like super gratifying. And I know, like, I was talking to a cake decorator before, and she had like a similar like thing to you. She said that she loves seeing people's reactions when they like get to pick up a cake, because yeah, I think it's just like such a cool feeling to be able to like create something that's gonna like be in somebody's backyard for a really long time, or maybe if they're eating it right after because it's a cake, then maybe that's a little different.
You're not hot.
Yeah. So that you kind of mentioned like the weather vane. So do you have like a favorite project that you've ever like worked on, or a piece that you've created?
Yeah, I was reached out to by a local township, and we have an old railroad bed where it's called the Unola Low Grade, and it's where the train used to pass through a number of years ago. Probably I think it stopped running in the 70s. But now it's a path that you can walk and hike or ride your bike at. And the local township reached out to me, and they wanted a bicycle rack that people could take their bikes and park them in this bicycle rack while they're loading or unloading their car, or if they're sitting at the picnic table. And they wanted it somewhat train themed because of it being on a railroad bed. So I reached out to some local friends who worked for a railroad company to see about getting some railroad rails, and they were able to get me two different pieces. One of them was from the late 1800 era, and more than likely was a rail that had been on that railroad bed at one point in time prior to them ripping the rails off. He happened to find it hidden in a big pile of brush where they dump all the scrap metal. So the history of that old railroad rail being put back on the same railroad bed that it possibly had been on, and having the markings on it, so any train historian can look at the back of that railroad piece and see where it was manufactured, the date it was manufactured, um, all that history on it, and then being able to put that together as a piece of, I guess you could say, artwork and something that can be used that people can enjoy was really fun. And it's only about 5 miles from our shop and our house, so we get to drive past it all the time and see it sitting out there on the railroad bed.
Wow, that is super cool. Like the history part, and also I think that you brought up like a really good point that like it's really cool to just see like your art that's like really functional too, because not only is it like cool to look at and it's like really cool to see the history behind the tracks, but you can also like see people like parking their bikes there, and it's like something that's like a cool part of the community.
We made it that it looked like it was part of the railroad bed. There's railroad ties, the wooden ties, and it's attached to it with the same type of plates. So yeah, we have some pictures that we can send you.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. That sounds like such a cool project.
It was fun. It was a lot of work, and it was a lot of trying to think outside the box, and a lot of math. And I'm not crazy about math, but there's a lot of different angles in math, and but all in all, it came together pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm not so much of a math person myself either, but yeah, so I totally get that. So I guess this is kind of like transitioning into my next question, which would be like, what's the most challenging part of your job?
Most challenging would probably be quoting jobs. You can pretty well figure out the cost that you're going to need for material, so forth, but when it comes down to something you've never made before, there's a lot of troubleshooting and a lot of problem solving, and you're going back to the drawing board multiple times. And so sometimes you quote a job for, say, 2.5 hours, and it ends up taking 6 hours. And that's kind of frustrating and stressful because you worked twice as hard, twice as long on a project, but you're only getting paid for half of that time because that's what you quoted.
Yeah.
So being able to guesstimate the amount you need of materials, and for the most part you know what your cost of materials are. With steel they vary. Sometimes the prices are higher, sometimes the prices are lower, depending on what the economy is doing. But then you also have to work in your power that you're using, the electricity you're using, the consumables, the grinding discs or your belt sander disc, any welding wire or propane you're using or coal. So my forges are coal forge and a propane forge, the methods of heating them. But then also you got to take into account the time it takes you to drive to your steel supplier, and the time it takes to drive back, and the cost of fuel to drive there and back. So there's a lot of things that I think people don't really think about when they're buying something handmade from an artisan or a handcrafter, that there's a lot of things that go into it. It's not just them sitting down making it. It's the time that they've put into designing it. It's the materials. It's the costing to go get those materials, and all those things go into that one small little thing that person made.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that like that was a really good explanation, because you kind of explained like like the fuel that goes behind it, and just like all sorts of like small things that you maybe wouldn't think about, like even if you're the person like who's kind of pricing it out. So I guess my next question would be like, when you like get a new job and like it's something that you've never made before, like how do you go about like deciding like what the price is?
That's always the difficult thing. A lot of times it's very similar to something I've already done before, so I can kind of base it off of that. Sometimes we bid it a higher cost and let the customer know that there's a good chance that it'll be lower, but we don't know until we really get into it. It's a hard one. Sometimes you end up doing a job and you kind of lose your rear end on it. You don't make the money off of it you planned on because it took you longer, or it took more materials, or more consumables. But then and then in the future, when you get that job again, you know what it's going to cost. I have an individual that I do some wholesaled items with, and I quoted it at one cost, and then I let them know that, this set here we're going to sell for this, but the next set I'm going to have to do it at this, because now I know how much time it takes, how much material it takes, and how long it takes. And they were okay with that. But it's a very custom item that they had me do, and they can't get it anywhere else. So I guess I kind of have the upper hand on that. That they could possibly go somewhere else, but that person's going to have to either charge the same amount as what I'm charging, and they don't have any idea how I did it, or they're going to have to go through the same process I did. They might lose out at the first go around, but then they'll have to make it up in the second go around.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's kind of like a good strategy, is just to kind of like see and like adjust, definitely, like even if it's with the same customer or person, because it's really important that like you're kind of like getting like the work that you're putting in. And I think that's something that's super important that we've talked about like on previous episodes, is like with people who are just starting out in kind of like a artisan craft business, like maybe they're undercharging at first, and then like they eventually kind of like work up their price. So I was just going to ask, like, is that something that kind of you've done too, is like you undercharged in the beginning, and then maybe like now you're starting to realize that like...
Yeah, we've looked at products and we couldn't believe that we were selling them for as cheap as we were selling them for. And those same products nowadays are 3 to 4, maybe 5 times as much as what we originally were selling them for. As you grow in your business, so does your skill. You look at your like my fire pokers. The ones early on probably didn't look near as good as the ones I'm making now, but that's 5 years of honing that skill and making them. It's the same amount of material, it's the same process, but handcrafters a lot of times, or people that do handmade items, they don't always charge what their product really should be worth. When you look at something that you made, you're like, oh, it's only worth $5. But then somebody else would look at it and go, oh my God, I'd pay $50 for that. That's worth $50. So you don't always see the value in it, and that's something when you're starting out, you have to kind of talk yourself up, I guess, to yourself, and say that it's worth that, and not, oh, well, we'll just make it this, and kind of limit yourself. It's kind of hard to explain, or trying to figure out how to explain what I'm getting at here, though.
Yeah, no, definitely. I understand. Like, I think that you're just saying that, like, yeah, like, you have to, like, really take into account, like, okay, like, how hard did I work on this, and not, like, short sell yourself, because... Yeah, okay, cool.
Yeah, exactly. And, and we've also noticed that depending on where you're at, really depends on your sales. Like, we've done shows up until this whole COVID deal, and some areas you just aren't going to sell. It's just not your market, your people. And then other places you can't catch up because you're just making so many sales of that show. But you also got to realize that not everybody is your market to sell to. Some people go to a craft show or a vendor show and they treat it like a yard sale, and they try to, well, would you take this for it? And don't limit yourself to thinking, well, I have to sell it for cheaper because it's a sale. No, you're really cheating yourself by doing that. Your quality item is worth something, and don't sell it for cheaper just because it's a sale, because then you're going to get into that habit of just constantly selling your stuff and selling yourself short.
Yeah, definitely.
Is like, I think of what I'm trying to get at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, like if you kind of like make an exception for one person, then like somebody else is going to come along and be like, hey, like, you sold that to them for, 50% off. Like, I want that same deal. And then it just kind of, then like you just can't get ahead of it. I totally get that. So you were talking about how like you were going to like craft shows and artisan shows. So I guess like, for people who are just kind of starting out, like, no matter what kind of craft you're into selling, like, could you just explain a little bit about like how you go about, like, do you just kind of sign up for a booth there and then go, or how do you kind of like navigate that part?
So the best advice I can give for this is get yourself a notebook and keep notes. Did the event have good signage? Did the event have good advertising? Was your space good? Was it clear on where you're going and how to get there, where your booth was, what the weather was that day, how much you paid for your booth spot, all those things, all the details, because next year you're not going to fully remember what that event was like, how many people were there, what your sales were, what the weather was, and all those things really matter. The last year we did shows, we did 50 shows in 9 different counties.
Oh, wow.
And and some of those drives are like 3 to 4 hours away. So for us, setting up, it takes about an hour for us to set up our booth from the time we pull it out of our trailer to having it ready to make the sale. It takes about an hour. If I'm doing demos where I'm actually showing people how I blacksmith, I have a mobile setup. It takes about an hour and a half for us to set up. Yeah, so with COVID-19, it really shut down a lot of the craft shows to nothing. They're starting to come back now, but with us having a 1-year-old, it's just not the market for us to, my wife's pregnant, we have a 1-year-old, trying to wrangle in a 1-year-old and eventually a newborn at a craft show is just not the ideal situation, so we're going to just hold off on craft shows for right now. But we're comfortable with that because our sales are good online, and so we feel that we can actually step away from them. Prior to that, we didn't know if we could. We were afraid to step away and just completely trust that our sales online were going to be what could sustain us. And with this whole COVID thing, we found out that, hey, we can rely on just making online sales because we had to. So craft shows, though, the biggest thing with them is see how well they're advertised. Talk to other vendors that you might know that have done it or are going to be there. Ask questions to the event, the people who are hosting the event. What's the attendance? Do you advertise? How much is the booth space? Each place, the booth space is different costs, different sizes. Typically, we had a 10 by 20 plate spot, which is about 2 to 2.5 worth of vendor spaces compared to the normal 10 by 10 spot that a normal vendor would have. So, each place is different. Sometimes the costs are different because it's a different area. A firehouse Christmas bazaar is going to probably be a different cost than a wine mixer with some music at a vineyard. Sometimes the ones where it was just come set up and it's free, they paid out better in sales than paying $20 or $50 for a booth spot. So don't discount that either. I mean, we've had some really great ones where it's just, come here, set up, and do your own thing. No need to pay any booth space.
Yeah, definitely. That's really cool. And I think that was like a good overview of kind of like what you should do at the craft shows. And I think like the main kind of thing that you were saying there was just to like be really alert and just kind of like be ready to kind of like learn and pick up on what's going around you. And I think that was really interesting when you were talking about like, how like your website sales, and because of COVID, like a lot of people have just been like shopping online instead. So I think that would kind of be like the next part is, so like you guys have like, I checked out your website, like it's a pretty cool like nice website. So how do people kind of like find you online? Like what are your strategies for that?
Well, we first just started out with Facebook and then some Instagram and word of mouth, and just really pushed that.
Mm-hmm.
So many people are like this, share this, click this, win this to get more likes on their social media, and that's great and all, but that's not organic. Typically, those people are just in it for a win, and if they don't win, or even if they do win, they a lot of times will then unlike it and move on. We've always found that an organic like goes so much further than a non-organic like. We have so many customers that are repeat customers, and by repeat I mean like from our first year in business, just because we were genuine and we talked to them and we had respect for them, and they just loved our business model and who we are and what we're about, that we've had them come back time and time again for a couple of years now, and it's an organic like. They follow us. They sometimes have become friends on our personal Facebooks
Mm-hmm.
or Instagrams, and we've really built a great network up that way. And those same people will then advertise for you and not charge anything. They'll like a product that you made, so they'll share it. And then a friend of theirs or a family member of theirs will have purchased it. And then they became an organic like. And then they share it. And so you have 100 friends, and those 100 friends share it. 50 of their people that shared it, it just slowly grows, and before long, you could have 300,000 people following you just by being organic and not per se being fake and trying to get all those likes and shares, but the people really don't truly like and share it.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it's just like really about like letting the work speak for itself, and like, just kind of being like kind and genuine, because I think that's like
Yeah,
refreshing, especially on social media where there's like so much of that like kind of crazy just stuff out there.
yeah. So we started there, and then my wife started to build the website herself, and she got it to a certain point where it was good, but it needed a little something more, and we didn't know what or how to do that. So then we started reaching out to some other businesses that's what they do. They cater to building websites for small businesses, and it was probably 6 months or so that my wife met with this guy on Zoom, and they built the website, and it is now what our website is now what it is, because he did some stuff, she did some stuff, they did stuff together, and built our website to what it is now. And it's not just sell, 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 and what we make to sell. It's our lifestyle. It's what we do. It's what we are into. There's posts about how we homeschool. There's posts about us in our garden and our homestead and what we do on it, and how in the midst of COVID and this is also kind of goes to our Facebook. We share our lifestyle so people can really understand who we are and what we're about. In the midst of COVID, we did house projects, but we didn't go out and buy the lumber or the materials. We scavenged across our property and made what we had here work, just because it was a little bit of a funner way to do it. A lot of it is just being you, and not trying to act like someone else. And that really helped, I think, us with our website and our social media. We just continue to add our content to it of what we do on a day-to-day basis, and people seem to really enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just about creating like just being like a really like nice, like just having like really personable connections, and yeah, like you were saying, like just being kind of genuine and kind. And I think that people take generally well to that, and it seems like you guys have had quite a bit of success with your strategy. So yeah, I guess like then kind of my next question would be kind of like transitioning into some advice that you might have for people who are kind of like younger and coming up behind you on this business. So like, what traits do you think are like super important for being like a good blacksmith and or like business owner?
You know, a lot of times people say I'm an artisan or I'm very artistic, and I have to laugh at that because when I was in school, I hated art class. It, I just did not like it, and I think now, looking back at it, it's because the art teacher wanted me to do it their way, and there's only one way to do it. And I understand that they're probably trying to teach a certain process or teach the method or the reason behind doing it that way. Now I look at it and I'm like, you know, I guess I am to a point somewhat of an artisan or an artistic nature. As far as traits, I mean, like in metalworking, it can be hot, it can be strenuous on your muscles and on your body, but it's also rewarding at at the same time. You know, in the wintertime, my metal is very cold, so you're holding a cold piece of metal, and it takes a long time to get it to do what you want it to do because you're having to heat it a lot more. But then in the summertime, it's not cold, but now it's already hot as it is standing in front of that forge, but now it's even hotter because it's the summertime. I guess you just have to be okay with not always being 100% comfortable. You know, sometimes you're going to be cold, sometimes you're going to be hot.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be flexible, be like Gumby, and you know, go with the flow, and you know, have to overcome and adapt. Sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board. You might get halfway through a project and you just do one little thing and it breaks, and you have to pretty much just come to the terms with that's going to happen. I mean, you look at these glass blowers; they have the same thing. You know, they're all the way done, and just a little tap ended up, and it was too hot or too cold, and the whole thing shatters, and you have to start over again. It's not quite that with blacksmithing or metal fabricating, but sometimes you do something and it just doesn't work out. With my signs, I've gotten like all the way done carving a sign, and then all of a sudden there's a rotten spot in the wood that I didn't see or I couldn't feel, and I've got to go back to either how do I make this work or I got to start all over again. You got to have some real go-getter willing to just have to sometimes start over again and just push through. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, like for our Christmas season, there's sometimes I'm working 14 to 16 hours a day.
Oh, wow.
Just to get the orders done, to push through to get those orders out to people so they have them in time for Christmas. But then January and February, it's crickets, so I get to kick back and be all cozy in the house next to the coal wood fire with my kids, and we can watch Christmas movies until we're done watching all the ones we have on DVD. So, I mean, you have some give and take that you have to do too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that was like a really good kind of range. So like just to kind of recap, like, you know, flexibility is important in being able to adapt and just like kind of persevere through times that like might be difficult. And when you were mentioning the glass blowing, like I don't know if you've seen this, but I like have been loving Blown Away on Netflix.
Yes. Isn't that a great episode?
Oh my gosh, that show is like so, like it's so interesting.
Yeah. I kind of want to try it. I think I kind of want to try some glass blowing sometime. If I ever have the opportunity, I think I'd like to try it and see what it's about.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that much of a huge jump other than like the material from like metalworking and glass blowing, because you know you've got I mean, I'm by no means an expert, like stop me if this is.
Yeah.
But I feel like, you know, you've got kind of like a furnace, and then you're kind of like working with like a heated material, and then when it kind of like cools down and everything. But yeah, like I've seen on the show, like some people will have like a huge finished piece and then the whole thing just like shatter. It's heartbreaking, like even having to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky in that aspect that, you know, if I drop a fire poker or something or a bottle opener, that if anything, it might get a little scuff or a nick on it that I can clean up, but it's not shattering like theirs.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely, when I see that show, I'm like, oh man, I feel so bad for them. They just so far along, and then boom.
Yeah, totally crazy. So I think that I just have like one final kind of like wrap up question for you. So, like if there was somebody, say in like high school or college, like that wanted to start like learning about or like trying metalworking, like maybe they don't have like all the equipment, like are there places they could go or like videos that they could watch or something that they could do to kind of like see if they're interested in that?
Yeah, so a lot of, like, if you want to try blacksmithing or coppersmithing or a lot of just these old world trades, a lot of places, the like historical museums, they put on classes. And like I know I took one of their classes as a 2 day class. This is way early on before I even really had started the business. I had some history on blacksmithing through being a farrier and doing the shoeing and putting shoes on the hoofs of the horses. So I already kind of had some insight into that. But my wife took the class with me, and she had no insight. She had never touched anything blacksmith wise. So we took that class together, and it was a 2 day class. And this place, they provided the lunch and the material, but you had to get your own tools. Then we took another class a week later, and they provided everything for you. Both of those were historical preservation places, museums, and they hosted the classes. So look in your area for those, and they might be doing those kind of deals. You could reach out to like look and see if there's a PABA or a blacksmith association or a metal fabricator association or something like that, and see about doing that. The other thing you could do is just stop into a blacksmith shop or a metal fabricating shop, a steel shop, and just ask to talk to the owner and just express your interest.
Mm-hmm.
They may say, you can hang out here and watch. They may say no, but don't let that put you down. You could go to another place and they might say, yeah, sure, we'll bring you on as apprentice. You may not get paid, but you will learn the trade. You'll learn what the tools are and how to do this and how to manipulate the metal this way, and just ask questions and ask questions. You can possibly look into getting a job. They may offer you a job at some point. I took a blacksmithing class. The second one I took, one of the instructors got my number and would call me and say, hey, I'm going to be down at the blacksmith shop at this one historical society and museum. And he's like, you're welcome to come down and hang out. And I'll be, I'm going to be teaching this one person, but you can come down and start, messing around. And he kind of brought me in as his apprentice. I didn't have to pay. And he would just call me up anytime he was going over to do that. And then I joined the association, and he was a member of that association. And then there's times where I would have a customer that would call me and say, hey, I have this project, and it was something that I was not comfortable doing myself. So then I would call and say, hey, Dave, would you like this project? And he goes, well, it's your customer. That's your project. Why don't I come over and help you with it?
Oh, wow.
And then well, how much do you want for this? Nothing. This is your customer. This is your job. And so he would literally just come to help me with this project and wouldn't require any payment from me or from the customer. He just was there to help me further my education and further my skill set. So really, short of what's already available for free on like YouTube books, going into an in-person place and just asking follow them if you can, be an apprentice, is probably the way I know of what a person could do. If you're in high school, I guess look at if your school has an ag mechanics or a shop class. I know when I was in high school, we had ag mechanics in shop, and that was working on small engines and welding and oxyacetylene and that kind of stuff. And then I went to Votech. You could get more specific in that area, just in welding or in auto body. So look into your trade schools. There's a couple colleges around here that specifically touch just on those kind of things, just on welding, just on woodworking. And, if that's something that's really your passion, then dig into it. I had a long time and a hard battle with the fact that I didn't go to college because I had some learning disabilities. I didn't go to college, so I always felt like, not having that college degree really meant something that I, was missing out, or I couldn't get the great job because of it. But, these trade jobs pay a lot better than some of these other jobs with a college degree.
Yeah.
I mean, an underwater welder pays like 3 figures. If you weld for a pipeline, you're looking at 3 to 4 figures. And if you don't mind being out in the elements, or using your body and working instead of sitting at a desk job, you can make a good living and not have a college degree.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was like really great. Like, now listeners have like tons of great places to go if they're interested in learning about this, because I think that like that's kind of like the big thing is just like, like learning about it, like taking in, getting experience and seeing like what your passions are. And then you can kind of like, I think there's a quote that says like, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. Maybe I'm like totally botching that, but
No, that's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and the great thing about going into a trade job is they will train you and teach you how to do that job, and you're getting paid while doing that. College is great for some things, but for some people it's not, and I wasn't one of those. But when you're done with college, you have all the student loans that you got to pay off.
Yeah.
And in a trade job, you're getting paid while you're learning.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, some things that people don't realize about trade job is, you get paid while you're learning, and when you're done in that 3 to 4 years time, you don't have to pay off any student loans because you were learning while you're working.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's like a really good point, especially for anybody who's interested in getting into those jobs.
Yeah.
I think that's like a really good stopping place for our discussion today. Thank you so much for joining me. I learned so much on this episode,
problem.
And I had a really great time talking with you. So, thank you so much for just coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Hello and welcome back to the Fascinating Jobs podcast. I'm your host, Mackenzie Wilson. On this episode of the podcast, I'm sitting down with Zadok Leggett, the owner of Chapel Hill Forge, who's a blacksmith, metal fabricator, and custom wood sign carver. As always, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen so that way we can grow our community. And with that, let's get into episode number 17 with Zad.